Hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining me. Now, I'm going to play a video by a guy named Gary Stevenson. He's an LSE educated economist. He wrote a book in early this year called The Trading Game. And in that book, he writes about how traders get rich, basically, at the expense of the working class. And right now, for a while, as you'll see in this video that I'm going to play, he's been on a mission to tell everybody that the problem that we face here in America, at the UK, and all the collective West is a problem of wealth inequality. Now, I myself has been focusing on a different kind of inequality of citizens in a country, in the form of representation. And what he basically focuses on is the fact that the wealthy individuals have bought up all the assets. And as owners of the assets now are starting to raise the prices on the fire sectors of our economy, finance, insurance, and real estate, because the neoliberalism has allowed them, the laws have allowed them to do this. And he makes this argument that they're squeezing the middle class out of the opportunity to own. And Yanis Varoufakis would talk about how it is that we are a rentier capitalist society now, that we're all renters, and that's the way wealthy individuals like to have it. So this clip is about 10 minutes long. I urge you to watch the clip, and at the end, I'm going to come back and I'm going to make another appeal to you, as you know I always do, to ask you to share, subscribe, and like to my channel, and know that by doing that, you're actually doing something quite different than you would any other video that you watch on YouTube. Because when you like, share, and subscribe to my videos, you're actually doing something very, very powerful. You're given the other people the opportunity to make a decision on fighting a particular way, a very powerful way. And that's what this is all about, a grassroots movement to fight back. Here in the future, I'm going to start showing different people and their take and the way they explain what is going on, and then I'll come in at the end, or at the beginning and the end, and throw you that pitch to fight for decency. So without further ado, Gary Stevenson.
All right, so let's catch up a little bit with the broad economic political situation. The reason that wealth taxes have become relevant is because the economy is shit. And the economy is shit in exactly the way which I said it would be shit before the new government came in. And to be honest, this is relevant even if you're in the US or in other countries. I would like to add, the last 3 months I've been traveling the world, and I've been doing events talking about politics and about economics, and the same things are happening everywhere. So this is what I'm about to say. It's not just relevant to the UK or the US. Basically everywhere you have the same situation, which is there's kind of two flavors of government that you have at the moment, which is either this kind of boring, centrist, let's just be more efficient, let's just be more practical and sensible, and somehow that will fix things. And you have this kind of increasingly mentalist far right, which is just going crazy, doing crazy shit, but aggressively blaming immigrants and foreigners. And these two kind of flavors of modern government are really typified by, at the moment, the Keir Starmer Labour government here in the UK and the Donald Trump Republican government over in the US. And I came out before those guys came in, and I said, or it might have been just after, basically said, what you have here is something really interesting, because you've got these two kind of opposite flavors of government, which is your very sort of sensible, practical, traditional centrist Keir Starmer government, and this kind of wild, far right, alt right, whatever you want to call them, Donald Trump government, that are kind of set up as opposites, but they will both fail on the economy because both of them are failing to recognize the key fundamental economic problem that you have, which is that wealth inequality is growing very, 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 very quickly. The rich and the super rich are growing their wealth very aggressively. That is squeezing out and bankrupting governments, and that is squeezing out and bankrupting the middle class. And because wealth taxes and tax on the super rich are not really on the table, you end up with this situation where you have governments who have collapsed their wealth, given away all of their wealth, are hugely in debt, turning to a middle class who is also quite aggressively losing its wealth and saying, well, you need to pay more, and absolutely refusing to look at this group of people who are just absolutely squeezing everybody else out. And it's going to fail, basically. You know, this is like if you have, you know, you've got a patient on the operating table and they're hemorrhaging blood. The government is hemorrhaging wealth. The middle class is hemorrhaging wealth. And you try to fix it without stopping that hemorrhaging of wealth. You know, the boat has a hole in the bottom, and you're not going to fix it by rowing faster, and you're not going to fix it by blaming immigrants. Until we stop the middle class, the working class, and the governments from having all of their wealth squeezed out of them by the very rich, we will continue to see economic worsening. And this is why I was able to predict that Rishi Sunak would fail economically, that Keir Starmer would fail economically, that Donald Trump would fail economically, despite these three guys, Sunak and Starmer and Trump, being very different politicians. And it's really just for a very simple reason, which is the core of the economic crisis is growing wealth inequality. And none of these politicians, none of these political ideologies are willing to even really talk about inequality. And in fact, in many cases, especially in the case of Donald Trump and the more far-right parties, they're actively cutting taxes on billionaires. So, you know, what you have here is an economy with cancer and a bunch of politicians who don't believe in cancer. So it doesn't matter if it's Starmer on the tin or Trump on the tin, they're going to fail. They're going to fail unless they deal with economic inequality, which is a big problem because they're not addressing it. But it creates this massive, massive political opportunity, which is that what you will see, what we are seeing, what we will continue to see, is continued economic failures of different governments because they refuse to deal with the actual problem. In many cases, I think they don't recognise the importance of inequality as the actual problem. And if you want to understand specifically why it is that governments and politicians and economists don't realise why why inequality is the problem, we do have a video on the channel called Understanding Why Economists Ignore Inequality. We'll put that in the description at the bottom. But basically, these guys will fail again and again. And it puts us in a great position because we can correctly predict that. So I came in before Starmer came in saying that he would win and he would fail really badly on the economy and he would be very unpopular. I said the same thing about Sunak. I said the same thing about Trump. And it also creates this massive demand for something new, right? Because people don't want to live in poverty. People don't want their kids to live in poverty. But it's increasingly clear to ordinary people that is what's happening, that they're being impoverished. And it creates this massive demand for new economic ideas, which I think we here on this YouTube channel are feeling really. And I think that's one of the reasons why this channel has become so big and so popular. And when I was traveling around the world, I realized that it's like popular all over the world really, which is kind of crazy. But that's because these problems are happening everywhere. So there's massive opportunity. I'm back now, we're going to make videos. We're going to try to drive into that space. I think there's such a massive gap to explain to people what's happening in the economy. And that gap is only going to grow as the economy gets worse and worse. But that opportunity, which is there for us to explain where economic worsening is happening, is not just being exploited by us here on this channel, it's also being exploited by the far right. And I think it's interesting to consider what will happen politically and how these two different political ideologies will respond to continuing aggressive economic worsening of living standards. So when you consider these kind of like centrist governments, and I think that includes not just governments like Starmer and Labour and Biden and the Democrats, but also, for example, the Rishi Sunak Conservative government was more or less a kind of boring centrist government economically. When they fail on the economy, they are really quite fucked, to be honest, because when your position is this kind of like radical centrism and your offer is just we're going to be really sensible, when you try to be really sensible and the economy fails, you basically don't have anywhere to move. These guys continually find themselves in the same situation, which is they make promises, they enter government, they realise that the government's given all of its wealth away, they turn to the middle class, who have also not had their wealth protected, and then they just basically say, we're fucked, we're going to just basically shut the welfare state down. And then that makes them very unpopular. These centrists have not really got anywhere to go, and that is a problem. because the new right, the far right, whatever you want to call them, they do have somewhere to go, which is, it's really, really obvious what these guys are going to do. When they fail on the economy, and Donald Trump will fail on the economy if he's judged by broad living standards, because he's not dealing with the growing inequality, they have people to blame, right? They say we were stopped by the centrists, we were stopped by the academics, the Supreme Court, the media, these negative elements within our society. They didn't allow us to be aggressive enough on immigration and foreigners, and then you shift further to the right, and that you have that space to move into. And you really see that, like here in this country, you know, we had obviously the Cameron Osborne government, who were not aggressively far right, especially on social issues. They failed on the economy, and they were replaced by Boris Johnson, who was further to the right on these social issues. And then he again failed on the economy, and he was replaced, well, it looks like he will be replaced by Nigel Farage, who was further to the right on these social issues. And basically, this will keep happening. You will see this flip-flap, which is the centre fails on the economy because they fail to deal with inequality. They're replaced by someone on the right. They fail because they fail to deal with growing inequality in the economy, and they're replaced either by someone in the centre or somebody further right. Because you need, when you can see that the status quo is failing, you always need to be able to sell yourself politically as something new. And I think unless really the centre or something on the left is able to come up and actually deal with this rapidly growing inequality, which is crushing the middle class and crushing governments, it is inevitable that we will see a progression of further and further right governments. And I'm not saying that Farage or Trump are fascists. If you want to say that, that's up to you. If we don't fix the economic problem, we will inevitably get further and further and further to the right governments that are more and more extreme. Because it's the only way that politicians can sell themselves as new and sell themselves as believably being able to fix the economic problem. So at this point, I would like to send a message out to the Labour Party.
So there you have it. Gary Stevenson makes his argument that says that they do this loop, they do this trading off. You know, the Democrats, the centrist Democrats, will try and be reasonable, you know, and responsible in promoting economic policies which are neoliberal, right? Because they're both on the same page. The Democrats, though, are a little bit more. I guess you could say they could argue that they're more reasonable, whereas the Republicans are very extreme, far to the right. And the idea is to continue go back and forth, because those in power have the ability to keep us, you know, to not give us a third party, you know, not give us the real representative government. So this is what we get. We get further and further to the right. Things get worse and worse. In Stevenson's mind, which I agree, wealth inequality is important, and this is a big reason why we are paying more and more, and we are ending up as renters here in America and across the what is called the collective West, wherever we have exported neoliberalism: France, Italy, Germany, Australia, so on and so forth. Not in those other countries like China and Russia, Iran, Iran, I think, is more of a sort of a theocracy, rather than Russia and China, which are communists or socialists, but they don't allow business people, rich people, to run their government. This is the difference. The collective West, you're rich, you run the government. And and this is what we're fighting. We don't want to be socialists or communists. I tell people, if you want socialism, go to the northern part of Spain, in the Mondragon area, in the Basque country, and there you see socialism. What we're trying to do is have a decent society where you don't have investment banking and commercial banking combined to create derivative financial instruments and derivatives to rip people off of their pensions and to get rich on Wall Street, inflating the prices on everything. We want the kind of capitalism that is industrial. Now, I know Trump is claiming to try and do that, but he's all wrong. In order to have an industrial capitalist, you have to have a base, you have to have a manufacturing base. He went straight to the tariffs, not understanding that you have to have people and capitalists interested in industry, and you can't do that when people or when companies are paying an outrageous wage to workers because the workers have to pay for things that should be for the public purpose. That should be free, like education, like healthcare. You allow a company not to pay those things. Now you could afford to pay the wage earner less because all those other things are taken care of. And now we're able to compete with China. But they don't want to do that, you see, because that takes money out of their pockets. And they really don't care about competing with China, right? They really, what they care about is making war and making money. You understand? So uh, go to my YouTube channel. It's called Fight for Decency. And please watch from beginning to end, prerequisite for a prosperous middle class. And in that introductory video, I pretty much lay out the worldview, the thinking on this whole thing, and then I give you the opportunity to make a stand, to make a decision, to fight. This is a grassroots movement. You know, I'm not asking influential people to push this like Joe Rogan and so forth. They have their own following, their own um, ideas of keeping their audience. This is grassroots. And it can actually be no other way. It has to be grassroots in order for this to work, because every individual in America has to understand that they, number one, have a responsibility to their fellow human beings, and also that they will be held accountable in the bigger picture, will be held accountable on the decision to make whether or not they're going to fight for decency. And they have to understand, we all have to understand that there's nothing, no amount of protest is going to change this. The only thing that's going to change it is power. And when we, the people, have what I call as a sabbatical and threaten the very core tenet of capitalism by property rights, that's power. So join me in this fight. Please wear the uniform, red and white, put it on your vehicle, drive down the road, and tell everybody you know to share, subscribe, and to comment. You know, comment. I want to hear what you think. Okay. I also have a YouTube webpage called fightfordecency.com. Visit that webpage, and I'm going to try from now on to put out a monthly newsletter on our progress. Thanks a lot for hearing me out, and I'll be making another video soon. Thanks. Fight for decency, because you know you have the power to.